how close is Ukraine to cutting off Crimea? And what would it mean for the Russian war effort if they lost access to the peninsula? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is coming in response to a story from about 3 days ago that Russia is reportedly fortifying the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. And you can see that the Kerch Bridge is one of the most crucial links between mainland Russia and occupied Crimea. And not only is it crucial for keeping the peninsula supplied with civilian food, water, infrastructure, just about anything, but it's also essential for the Russian military occupation, right? And you can take a look at the map. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about here. Crimea is just a non-negotiable for Russian forces. You can see here that there's really only one actual land bridge linking the mainland and Crimea that runs into Kerch. Now, the problem, of course, that Russia has is that you could see that this is also the home of a lot of Russian logistics, aviation, and other crucial military operational infrastructure, right? So it's also the home, of course, of a lot of Black Sea Fleet, or whatever's left of it. But you can literally see here that essentially if you are trying to supply any of the Russian forces in occupied Kherson or Zaporizhzhia, you've got to run those supplies through Crimea. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're like, you can run them through Donetsk, but I point this out because if we pull out our handy ruler, you can see that the actual logistical issues are pretty robust, namely because in order to pass supplies into this region, they have to make a pretty risky journey getting as close as 70 kilometers to the front line. And with systems like HIMARS or even some of the farther traveling Ukrainian drones, those supplies are going to spend a lot of time potentially sitting really close to the Ukrainian front line, uncomfortably close for a lot of the troops. So, or the troops who have to ferry those supplies. And so for Russia, it simply doesn't make sense to rely on any other passageway other than Crimea itself. That means, of course, that for Ukrainian troops, they've got to take out this link between Taman and Kerch. And so that's been a back and forth for at least 2 years as Ukrainian troops have heavily damaged the bridge both in October and then in the July of 2023. But of course, Russia continues to fortify the bridge, for example, with underwater barriers, given that the July 2023 strike was done with a drone. There's also a lot of barges installed, but recent reports have said that Kerch actually is adding a air defense system that they've rerouted from other places. You can see here, again, Russia is reportedly deploying air defenses to the Crimean Bridge in an effort to ensure that it remains somewhat functional. And this is coming from a partisan group inside Crimea who's saying, quote, the armed forces of the Russian Federation began to massively transfer equipment closer to the Kerch Bridge, and that Moscow is, quote, actively redeploying the surviving air defense installation, aircraft radars, and all military facilities from the western part of Crimea, likely moving them east towards Kerch. And this would indicate, of course, a major shift, given that Moscow maintains a lot of its air bases and more like logistics hubs in that western region. And it's been a routine target of Ukrainian drone strikes. So, of course, the Russians are not going to out this kind of maneuver. They're not going to openly say, hey, listen, we don't have any air defenses left in the western part of Crimea. But it could be a sign that things are getting quite a bit worse for Russian forces. Now, we're going to talk about just what Ukraine has done in the last couple of days that have probably made the Russians sweat and whether or not it's going to really impact things on the front line. But first, of course, if you are looking to get your sweat in, you don't need to instill some fear or God forbid, cut yourself off from food and water. Instead, you may just need a little extra caffeine to give you that push to get it done. That's why you should check out Strike Gum. Strike Gum, made in the USA, veteran owned, the energy drink alternative, 0 sugar. And each one of these pieces contain all the caffeine of a Red Bull or an Amp Energy. So the price is a no-brainer. If you are fed up with the inflation that has made energy drinks a $5 a day expense, you can get the superior solution. Sugar-free, refreshing mint flavor, doesn't taste like medicine, which is what Red Bull tastes like. I'm sorry, Red Bull. But not only that, but you can get it for as little as like 98 cents a piece if you use the tray. You could see here the tray, $70 on strikegum.com, 75 pieces, the equivalent of 75 energy drinks. Or, of course, if you want the 5-pack, that's probably the best deal. If you want to try it out for the first time, you can throw a pack in your gym bag, in your office, at home, anywhere you think you're going to need that little bit of energy burst. Of course, you can also get it on Amazon. Just go to Amazon, search Strike Gum, and you can pick it up there. Now, link is in the description, of course, so you should click it. Okay, so let's talk about what's happened in the last couple of days. UK Ministry of Intelligence is reporting that on the evening of July 23rd, Ukrainian forces damaged a roll-on, roll-off rail ferry in Port Kavkaz, Russia. This is, and we'll look up the map real quick, see if we can find it here. Port Kavkaz, as you can see, guys, is actually a ferry that transits separate from the Kch Bridge, right? You can literally see, I think this is the route here as they land. Now, the appeal of a roll-off, roll-on ferry seems simple. A roll-off, roll-on ferry, or at least a rail run, is one in which the cars actually roll onto a floating ferry that then sails across, docks with a railhead, and the whole train just rolls off and rolls back onto the tracks. Now, the appeal is that because the train is moving across the water via the ferry, so to speak, that means that Ukrainian drones, for example, just can't hit it. It's always moving. That's the sort of, by definition, how a ferry works. And so because of that, it's a very appealing alternative, though still much slower than driving things across the literal Crimean bridge, right? Now, this is what Russia's been using for a lot of its heavy lift logistics. As they point out, it's really going to create more problems in supplying its occupying forces and exporting liquefied natural gas. Of course, the targeted port has the largest capacity of 3 different roll-on, roll-off ferry routes. So taking out these other routes, which Ukraine apparently did in the 29th of May, mean that Russia really might have to go back to relying on the highly vulnerable Kch Bridge. And this is something that Russia does not want to do because both the bridge has been damaged and the repairs are not yet complete. But more importantly, it creates an even richer target, right? So Ukraine has basically been leaving the bridge alone for a while because it achieved its effect, right? Much of the ability to roll supplies across the bridge has been limited. Think of it like an artery in a heart attack, where the artery over time has narrowed, creating just a much smaller smaller tunnel that Russia can bring those supplies into the peninsula. But it also has forced Russia to use these roll-on, roll-off rails, which, while efficient, are not even close to being comparable to just driving it over, right? So for the Ukrainians, they said, we did good. And Russia deployed a whole bunch of defenses here to try to shore up the bridge. But now they can take out these roll-on, roll-off, means that the bridge is going to become the lifeline once again. And that means it's going to become a rich target for Ukrainian forces. And it's probably why we've seen Russia move all of its logistics, its air defenses, or its logistics defenses, across from Western Crimea into eastern Crimea, likely to secure this all-critical Kch Bridge, which even if the Ukrainians don't take out the bridge itself, the fact that all these logistics hubs are now very vulnerable is incredible, makes it an incredibly appealing target. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to the Colonel tier members, especially Martin Baum, Greg Pace, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, James Zola, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, among others, and all the Lieutenant tier folks. I could not do this without you guys. I appreciate you all so much. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.